I change my brain? Am I just a victim to who I am? I'm your host, Steve Sisler. Stay tuned for another episode of Behavioral Insights.
Welcome to another episode of the Behavioral Insights Podcast. I am your host, Steven Sisler. I need you to stay tuned for part 2 of our Waking Up series, coming up next after our epic opening music. All right, folks, welcome back to part 2 of the Waking Up series. We're going to be talking about Moses today. And if you've seen the story of Moses, maybe you saw the movie The Prince of Egypt or something like that, or maybe you've read the account in the Torah. We're just going to look at some patterns and principles in the Moses story and use it to help us along here. So according to the story, Moses was the meekest man on the face of the earth. So when we look at this story, you can remember Moses arguing with the voice that came out of the burning bush in the 3rd chapter of the Hebrew book of Exodus, found in the Torah. So when the voice attempts to draft Moses for the lead role in freeing the Hebrew slaves from the Pharaoh, Moses asks a question. He says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" In other words, why in the hell are you choosing me for this job? So as the story unfolds into chapter 4 of Exodus, Moses continues to make excuses as to why he's the wrong choice for this noble task. So he starts talking about his poor communication skills, his lack of experience, and general disbelief in the idea that anyone would ever even listen to him. But rather than agreeing with Moses, the voice from the flaming bush disagrees with his self-deprecating self-assessment. So I'm going to give you a PowerPoint here, and the PowerPoint is this. So this is what we're learning from this story as we understand it. If you want to know your true human worth, take a poll from honest people who know you and like you. This is where you're going to find out who you really are and what your value really is. So in this story, the Moses figure does not know about his leadership capacity at all. He's completely in the dark. And so when the deity speaks to him out of the bush, he really takes him to task when it comes to Moses's view of himself. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen this scenario many times in the lives of people. They never see themselves as other people see them. Now, granted, there's an abundance of people who see themselves in unrealistic ways. But from my note-taking, it's always those who underestimate their ability that have the greater chance of reaching the sacred destiny that awaits them. And this is what this story is teaching us. So if you pay close attention to the story of Moses, you'll see it was Moses' meekness that really qualified him for his leadership task, and not his personal recognition or his assumed leadership capacity or any of these other things. So this is when your lesser sense of self can work for you rather than against you. Now, there are some people where their self-esteem is just terrible and it does work against them. But this isn't that, and you need to know the difference. Now, if you remember any of King Solomon's quotes, I've got tons of them that I remember. Here's one. "Let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips." So it's important that we be recognized by others, but not in a haughty sense, self-recognizing ourselves or self-promoting ourselves. So I've seen this in people over the years. When people have a clear perspective of themselves and they understand and embrace what they lack, it really seems to highlight what they don't lack. In other words, like the story of Moses, the more we understand and embrace our perceived inability, now I don't mean this negatively, by the way, the more we tend to qualify ourselves for the impossible. And those who have a greater or a higher view of self, well, you know what happens to those people if you've seen that in the world. I know I have. So what's another interesting aspect to the Moses story? It's really centered on his employment. So what's the deal with Moses and his employment? So Moses works for his father-in-law. All right? How fun would that be? But he tends the flock of sheep that belong to his father-in-law, Jethro, who's a priest of Midian. Now, interestingly enough, if we journey backwards to a time right before Moses meets his father-in-law, Jethro, we get a real revelation, you could call it. So if you're familiar with the story, or if you've seen the animated movie, The Prince of Egypt, you remember this part of the story. So remember, after Moses flees from Pharaoh's attempt to kill him for accidentally killing an Egyptian taskmaster for beating a Hebrew slave, Moses finds himself sitting down at a well in the desert region of Midian, where he probably, is there to get a drink. Now, he's fleeing Egypt because he killed somebody. And it seemed sort of unintentional, but it's what happened. And this is because Moses was getting the revelation that he was also a Hebrew, and that the slaves were really his brothers and sisters. And, he got angry because of the way they were being treated. Anyway, so in the story, Jethro, who's the priest of Midian, he has 7 daughters. Now, these girls went to the same well where Moses sat in order to draw water from the well to feed their livestock. So while they're there getting water to feed the camels, a couple vagabond shepherds show up and drive the women away because they're hoarders. They're hogging the water. And so Moses immediately comes to their defense without reservation. Now, he doesn't know these girls at all. He just jumps to their defense because they were no match for these freaks that showed up and decided that the well belonged to them. So if you look at the story carefully here, this is a selfless act on Moses' part that really initiates the story of Moses that 40 years later results in this inciting incident known as the burning bush. So stories, remember what story is. Story is about a character who wants something and then has to overcome great odds in order to get it. All right, that's what story is all about. And all these stories have this element. Moses wants to do something about his enslaved brothers and sisters, and he has to overcome great difficulty in an effort to help them. And that's what makes the story great, or any story great. So consider, Rocky, Star Wars, Ben-Hur, any great epic story. One of my favorite stories is El Cid, played by Charlton Heston. That was a 1961 film with Sophia Loren. Great story of a character who wants something and overcoming great odds in order to get it. If you haven't seen El Cid, you've got to see that movie. If we, what the heck is wrong with me? I don't know why I can't freaking speak. It's like my lips are numb. Anyway, let's try this again. If we read between the lines in the story of Moses, Moses sees the life of these 7 women really as more important than his own life, which is a reflection of his worldview. Now, where would you see this view in formal axiology? It would be in the I1 score, which is the empathy element. So it's this type of reasoning that qualifies you for true servant leadership. So with no one around to observe his actions and no audience to applaud his efforts, Moses confronts the shepherds, rescues the women, and waters their flock. He didn't post it on Facebook either. So what's the message here? The PowerPoint is basically Moses is faithful with that which belongs to somebody else. In other words, Moses is an owner. Moses wants authority equal to or greater than his responsibility. So he wants authority over what he believes is in the realm of his responsibility, which is his space, the space he's in. So the simple fact that he was near the 7 girls at the well engendered a personal sense of responsibility for them. So Moses is concerned with what's going on around him. So how often do we see an injustice and then turn away because we don't want to be responsible for an outcome? We close the blinds because, we hear a ruckus outside. We don't want to get involved. But you see, what Moses does here is he puts himself into the story of these other people in an effort to make a difference. All true owners are like this. They're faithful with whatever belongs to somebody else, and it eventually qualifies them to have their own. When they're working for other people, they treat it like it's theirs. They don't over-focus on themselves. True entrepreneurs own in attitude before they really own in entity or in equity. And in Moses' case, it was Jethro's daughter Zipporah, who's later given to him for marriage. And so the very one he protected, he ends up married to later in the story. So it's sort of hard to come by these people types in the world and in the workplace. You don't see them very often. Those who actually take responsibility for their actions because they own their actions, and they assist other people with their actions because they're response-able or responsible. So most people see their position as a stepping stone or a necessary evil, and they see their actions as something separate from themselves. Human nature has a way of disassociating itself from what is maybe unpopular or uncomfortable or maybe unproductive within any social situation, because a lot of people are overly concerned with what other people are thinking about what they're saying and doing. For instance, behaviorists have noted that when a student at a university attends a winning football game, their tendency is to say something like, "Oh, we won last night," or "We destroyed that team." But what's interesting is when they lose, their team loses, they disassociate. So they say, "Oh, the team lost," or "they lost." It's unusual when they do large surveys of asking people how the game went that they associate with losing. They tend to disassociate with it. And this is what people tend to do. So Moses never disassociates himself with unpopular things or unpopular people or people maybe that are in need or what have you. He basically makes the best of these situations. So responsibility really means the person is able to respond or is response able in any given situation. And this is what Moses does. He's always rising to the occasion. So his selfless act of kindness at the well, really that was performed at his own expense, it ultimately becomes the catalyst that launches him into a 40-year career tending his father-in-law's flocks. So what I find interesting about this story is that he does this without complaint, contempt, or coincidence. It's just crazy how this story unfolds through the life of the Moses character. So this leads me to my next point. When we are content to know nothing, do nothing, and be known for nothing, it eventually qualifies us for everything. Let me say that again. When we are content to know nothing, do nothing, and be known for nothing, it qualifies us for everything. And this is what I call the death that counts. And you can read about this in some of my books. I know I talk about this. So working for family can be difficult to do. I have clients that are in family businesses, and it's not easy, especially if it's your wife's parents. So being content with living on the backside of the desert for 40 years, looking at sheep ass every day, is something that a lot of people don't know anything about. So what's a PowerPoint here that we can learn from this part of the Moses story? Moses was content with obscurity before publicity. You know, a lot of people, they're not content in obscurity. They want to be the star of the show. They want to be on the main stage. They want they want all the good lines in the play. They want the lead role. Folks, this isn't leadership. Being content to be on the backside is usually a very good qualifier to get you on the front side. And that's just how I've seen it work. And this story really highlights this. So Moses doesn't seek the limelight. He doesn't seek center stage. He's on the backside of the desert. He's minding his own business. He's working for his father-in-law. He's not vying for position power. He's not constantly name-dropping the priest of Midian for selfish gain or for points with important people. He's really living the death that counts. So what can we learn from this? When we die to our own desires in order to help another person with their desires, you can see what happens. But how many people are truly able to do this? Do we work for the weekend or do we work for our employer? Are we constantly criticizing corporate or are we catalysts for changing poor situations within the corporate space that we're in? So regardless of what we believe about any corporate entity, how you treat it is going to have a lasting impact on your own destiny. What's a PowerPoint we can learn from this? Contentment is great gain. Being content, being happy where you are, and doing everything in your power to make it good. This is how we grow in our work. This is how we get promoted in our work. Not because we're trying to be promoted. It's because we're faithful with what we've been given, even though it belongs to somebody else, and we give it our best shot. How many people are in a role just until I can get, quote, that role, right? How many people are using their work as a means to an end rather than an end in and of itself? And this is what makes the difference. I've always done this in everything I've ever done. No matter whom I ever worked for in the past, I treated the business as if it were my very own. And you know what it did? It qualified me to have my own. This is how this works. So people who go places in life have little to no disdain for where they were before they went to where they are. They were content with where they were and they embraced it. So we've got to embrace where we are if we're going to qualify for a better place. You've got to embrace where you are if you're going to qualify for a better place. What are you doing right now when you work? Do you hate it? Do you go into work with like a bad attitude? Do you give it not your all, but just a little bit because it's Friday and you can't wait to go home? Like, what kind of energy are you putting into your work? Because if you want to get to a better place, how you leave the place you're in is going to determine how you enter the place you want to go to. So this is really about entering. It's not about leaving. If you're going to enter properly, you got to leave properly. When I left my former business and entered this consulting business, I left my business on top, and I actually gave my business to another person. And I'm telling you, it set the stage for everything I'm experiencing now. And that's not why I did it. I'm looking in hindsight. And so Moses in the story here, he embraces his current situation. His actions become the consequential reason for the advancement to where he was going to be. And so that's what's important. You know, I talk about my friend Mike. This is what he does. No matter where he is, he gives it all he's got. He treats it like it's the last job he's ever going to have. He owns it. He doesn't flaunt his knowledge. What does he do? He gives it away and empowers other people with it. He doesn't see it as gold to be hoarded, but food to be given to the needy. And he does this because he's a secure person. So Mike doesn't mess with petty rules or violations in regard to others as insecurity ruthlessly demands, but rather he's an encourager. He empowers other people as one who's both familiar and free with his gifts and his weaknesses. So what's something we can learn from Mike? The more secure you are, the more you let go of what you know so that you can use it to empower other people. Do you know that insecure people hoard information in the workplace and they don't let you in on it? They want to keep you in the dark so that they can hold power. These leaders are hoarders. They're hoarders. They keep their knowledge to themselves. They withhold important information while making subordinates jump hoops in order to get it. They mistakenly believe this keeps them in a position of control. But what does it really do? It keeps them in position as asshole, is what it does. So these people are never content to know nothing. They want to look like they're the person who knows everything, and they want to limit who else is going to know it. That's bad leadership, folks. That's not going to work. So remember, those content to know nothing have no qualms with giving their knowledge away to others in an effort to better their abilities because they're not in competition with the people around them. They know it's going to empower and benefit other people to fulfill the responsibilities that they've been given, as well as assist them in where they need to go. So it's not all about us. It's not all about us and where we're going. It's where are we going? I talk about me leaders and we leaders. So in the story, Moses is a we leader. So there's nothing worse than being given a task without also being empowered with authority to carry it out. So great leaders empower others with all they know. They don't just give them enough information to keep them needing more and under their control. So what's a PowerPoint here we can learn from this? Hoarders are habitually in positions of control. So rather than creating the environment, they desperately seek to control the environment. So are you creating an environment in your work? Are you trying to control it? You know, a lot of managers that I run into, they're only trying to control the environment. They're not empowering the people in the environment and creating a great work environment for people to enjoy. So my friend Mike, much like the Moses character, he died the death that counts. And as a result, he's really numbered among the few. You know, a few years ago, my friend Mike, his wife cheated on him after 27 years and left him for her running coach. And here's the deal. Mike was willing to work it out. He spent countless hours in counseling with his wife in order to fix what might be broken. He forgave his wife. He was willing to put the deed behind him for her benefit and for the benefit of his children. But she would not have it. Or maybe she couldn't have it. You know, she had some issues. But either way, it wouldn't work out for Mike to continue his marriage. In all my hours with Mike in conversation, I want you to hear this. I really need you to hear this. He spoke with pity and reflection. Never did I ever hear disdain or hate for his wife. During legal negotiations, he also acquired all their personal debt and took it upon himself to pay all the bills so she wouldn't have to burden herself with her share. That's what Mike did. He sold their home of many years with all its memories and divided what was left equally. In the 3 years that this unfolded, I never once heard him speak ill against his now ex-wife, and to this day, he remains kind and tender-hearted towards his ex-wife, even after all she did. Here's the deal. Mike is a Moses. Whether it's his own family or his workplace, Mike is the same way in every environment, just like Moses is. So those underneath him in work, they love him, just like his daughters do, just like I do. And so it's fascinating to watch. Do you know anybody like this? Because let me tell you something, they're rare. And being a hero isn't without cost. So like Moses and like Mike, being a hero has its counterweights. So if you remember in the story, Moses married Zipporah, as we talked about, but it wasn't, fun and games. Zipporah was not the same ethnicity as Moses. She was a Cushite and not an Israelite. So in the 12th chapter of the book of Numbers, Moses' sister and brother, if you remember, Miriam and Aaron, they take offense at Moses because he married a Cushite wife. But there's a more sinister reason for this in the story. If you can read between the lines that are between the lines, you can see that they're actually jealous of Moses' success. And one of the quotes that his sister has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Like God can speak through us too. And so it's hilarious to read this. So this is when the story speaks of the humility of Moses. But more than that, there's a contempt for him from his own family. He appears to be favored by the deity here, because according to the story, the deity allows Moses to speak with him face to face, but Miriam and Aaron don't get to do that. You got to understand something about human nature. Left to itself, it's going to rot like a banana in a basket. So when people experience success, two things result in a lot of the people watching. Here's what success can do. It can expose the fear in the insecure, and it exposes the jealousy in the ambitious. All right? So the insecure people will be filled with fear, and the ambitious people, they're all going to be jealous. I see this in work all the time. So this is what happens to the Moses figure in the Exodus story. And it happens to my friend Mike, too, in almost every job he's ever had. One of the main issues with vulnerability is that it leaves you vulnerable to attacks by insecure and ambitious folks. And so insecure people have a way of assaulting you in veiled ways, like pointing out a perceived deficiency, a general weakness, or revealing a secret. Basically, this is what we call getting thrown under the bus, folks. And you may have been thrown under the bus. I got a story that I remember. My wife, she makes a great cheesecake. And ironically, she got her recipe off the back of a ready-made graham cracker crust container. About 30, no, God, it's got to be longer than that. About 30 years ago, maybe 33 years ago. What is that? 19? I don't know when it was, but it was like in the early 80s. Anyway, so I remember the year, it was 1989. We were invited to a party, and my wife brought her cheesecake. Now, one of her friends was there at the party, and knew, about her cheesecake. And she shared probably with her where she got the recipe or whatnot. So when my wife shows up at the party with the cheesecake and people start eating it, this person is standing by, and somebody said, "Wow, this is great cheesecake. Is this your recipe?" Like that. And before my wife could even speak, this other woman says she got it off the back of a pie tin. And then just looked at my wife with this, I don't know, I'll never forget it, with this wry smile. So this is the price my wife pays for making a respectable cheesecake, and maybe receiving some much needed attention in the presence of an insecure person who needed the attention more than she did. So this girl was in competition with my wife. So she exposed her recipe and just made it look like, you just got that recipe off the back of a pie tin. You're not that smart to come up with a cheesecake like that. That's really what was going on, and my wife cried all the way home. Anyway, that was so damn annoying. But this is what people do. So what's a PowerPoint we can learn from that? Hurt people always hurt people in order to lessen their own pain. So there's a lot of employees, folks, crying on their way home from work because some insecure leader hogged the attention, or maybe even threw them under the bus or something in an effort to make themselves look better at the expense of another person. The fear of unimportance and loss of social recognition always enables, certain people to disempower other people rather than to empower them. These people are small, they're insecure, and they're never going to make it the way they could. Their life is never going to turn out the way it could turn out. So sad. It's very sad. So what are we learning from the Moses story? Well, you ready? Meekness is not weakness. That's one thing you can learn from the Moses story. Meekness is not weakness. And so he died the death that counts. He was content to know nothing. He was content to do nothing. And he was content to be known for nothing. He lived in obscurity. And the inciting incident created with the burning bush part of this story thrusts him into a position of greatness, something he didn't desire, something he didn't want, but something he had earned, and he didn't even know it. So that's our podcast part 2 in the Waking Up series. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or questions, I really love your comments, so I appreciate those. If you think somebody could benefit from some of this stuff, folks, I really appreciate it when you share it around. Let people in on the podcast and what we're doing here, and all that jazz. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, you've been listening to the Behavioral Insights Podcast.